Then I moved in. Everybody thought I was a pediatrician, but I wasn't practicing. But then I met a real pediatrician.
Frank Abagnale is known worldwide as one of the most famous con men in history. But there's one question people keep asking him more than anything else. What was the worst thing he ever did? In this video, we take a closer look at his own words and the moments he has openly reflected on from his past. Some parts of his story are surprising, others are uncomfortable, and a few raise serious questions about trust, choice, and consequence. Join us as we break down Frank Abagnale's own reveal of the worst thing he did as a con man. First taste of fraud. Before he became one of the most famous con men in America, Frank Abagnale was just a teenager struggling to deal with a painful family situation. His early life was filled with confusion, disappointment, and anger. Those feelings played a major role in shaping the choices that would later make him notorious around the world. Frank grew up in what first seemed like a normal middle-class family. His father was successful and well-liked, and Frank admired him deeply. But everything changed when his parents' marriage began falling apart. Their divorce hit him hard. He was especially hurt by the separation because he felt caught in the middle of their arguments and emotional tension. At a young age, he suddenly had to deal with feelings of abandonment and instability. He later admitted that the divorce affected him more than people realized. Money problems also started becoming more noticeable after the breakup. The comfortable life Frank once knew slowly disappeared. Watching his father struggle financially left a strong impression on him. Frank felt frustrated and embarrassed by how quickly life had changed. Instead of learning healthy ways to cope with those emotions, he began looking for shortcuts. His first scams were small, but they showed how quickly he learned how to manipulate situations. As a teenager, he started experimenting with fraud, using his father's credit card. He would buy items from stores and then return them for cash refunds. Sometimes he even altered receipts to get more money back. These were not complicated crimes, but they gave him something powerful: confidence. What shocked Frank most was how easy it all seemed. Store employees rarely questioned him. Adults trusted him simply because he looked calm and acted confident. He realized that people often accepted whatever sounded believable. That discovery changed the way he saw the world. Lying no longer felt difficult or dangerous to him. Instead, it started feeling useful. At first, Frank probably understood that what he was doing was wrong, but over time, he began justifying his actions. In his mind, he was not hurting anyone directly. He convinced himself he was surviving, adapting, and finding ways to get by after his life had fallen apart. That mental shift became extremely important. Once he stopped seeing fraud as a serious moral problem, crossing bigger lines became easier. Frank also had early encounters with police during these years, but they did not scare him the way people might expect. In some cases, he managed to talk his way out of trouble. Other times, the consequences were minor. Instead of discouraging him, those experiences actually increased his confidence. Every successful lie made him believe he was smarter than the people around him. As he continued deceiving others, Frank became better at reading people. He learned how to sound convincing, how to stay calm under pressure, and how to create believable stories instantly. Long before he pretended to be a pilot or doctor, he was already building the skills that would later make him famous. But the small scams of his teenage years were only the beginning of something much bigger. Soon, Frank would discover just how far confidence and deception could really take him. Fake Pan Am pilot. After gaining confidence from his early scams, Frank Abagnale began looking for a bigger identity that could give him money, freedom, and status. He eventually found the perfect target: airline pilots. During the 1960s, pilots were respected everywhere they went. They looked professional, traveled internationally, stayed in expensive hotels, and were treated like celebrities. To Frank, becoming a pilot seemed like the ultimate disguise. He specifically chose Pan American World Airways because Pan Am was one of the most famous airlines in the world at the time. Its pilots were instantly recognized and trusted. Frank understood something important very early. People rarely questioned someone wearing a respected uniform. The uniform itself created authority before a person even spoke. But simply putting on a pilot's outfit was not enough. Frank spent time studying everything connected to airline culture. He learned aviation terms, pilot behavior, airport procedures, and the way crews interacted with each other. He listened carefully to conversations and memorized technical words so he could sound believable. Even though he knew very little about actually flying a plane, he became skilled at pretending he belonged in that environment. To complete the identity, Frank forged Pan Am documents and fake credentials. He created employee IDs, licenses, and paperwork that looked official enough to fool airline workers. He also invented a believable personal history for himself. Whenever someone asked questions, he had answers ready immediately. He understood that hesitation could expose him, so he always spoke confidently. His appearance played a huge role in his success. Frank was young, well-dressed, calm, and charming. Most people never imagined that someone so confident could be lying. Airline employees, hotel staff, and even trained professionals accepted his story almost instantly. In many cases, nobody checked his background carefully because they assumed someone else already had. One of the biggest benefits of his fake pilot identity was free travel. Through a system called deadheading, pilots could ride on flights without paying when traveling between assignments. Frank used this system to fly across the world for free. He visited countries all over Europe, traveled throughout the United States, and enjoyed a lifestyle most people could only dream about. Wherever he went, he received special treatment. Hotels gave him luxury rooms. Restaurant workers treated him with respect. Strangers wanted to talk to him because being a Pan Am pilot sounded exciting and important. Frank quickly became addicted to the attention and comfort that came with the role. He also pulled other people into his fake world. He spent time with flight attendants, airline employees, and new friends who completely believed his story. Some trusted him enough to travel with him or introduce him to others. Every successful interaction made his double life feel more real, but living inside the lie became dangerous. The more successful he became, the more relaxed he grew. Sometimes he stayed in one place too long or talked too confidently around experienced airline workers. There were moments when people almost discovered the truth. A suspicious employee, an unexpected question, or missing paperwork could have destroyed everything instantly. And as Frank's confidence kept growing, he started believing he could fool almost anyone, a belief that would soon push him into even riskier scams. Check fraud. As Frank Abagnale became more confident in his fake pilot identity, he also discovered a much bigger opportunity: check fraud. During the 1960s, banks operated very differently from today. There were no instant computer checks, no online databases, and very little real-time communication between banks. Most transactions were processed manually by employees. That slow system created weaknesses that Frank learned to exploit better than almost anyone else. He spent time studying how banks handled checks, deposits, and account verification. Frank paid close attention to details that most people ignored. He learned what official bank documents looked like, how payroll checks were formatted, and how long it took for banks to discover fraudulent transactions. The more he learned, the more he realized the system depended heavily on trust and routine. Frank began creating fake payroll checks, deposit slips, and identification documents. Some were completely forged, while others were altered versions of real checks. He used different printing methods and fake account numbers to make them appear legitimate. Since security systems were limited at the time, many banks processed the checks before realizing something was wrong. By the time the fraud was discovered, Frank was already gone. One of his biggest advantages was mobility. He constantly moved from city to city, sometimes changing locations within days. He rarely stayed in one place long enough for investigators to track him down easily. If suspicion started building in one state, he simply traveled somewhere else and started again under a different identity. His fake Pan Am pilot status helped him move quickly and cheaply across the country. Authorities struggled to keep up with him because communication between police departments and banks was much slower in that era. Frank understood this weakness and used it to stay ahead. While investigators were still collecting reports in one city, he was already cashing checks somewhere else. But Frank's success was not only about fake documents. Much of it came from psychology. He knew how to speak confidently, act relaxed, and appear trustworthy. Bank employees often believed him because he looked professional and calm under pressure. He wore sharp clothing, maintained eye contact, and avoided acting nervous. He understood that people were less likely to question someone who behaved as if they belonged there. In many situations, confidence mattered more than technical skill. Frank was not a financial expert or a trained banker. What made him dangerous was his ability to convince others that he was legitimate. He knew most employees wanted to avoid conflict or embarrassment, so they often accepted his explanations without pushing too hard. As the scams grew larger, so did the pressure. Frank was stealing enormous amounts of money while living under constant fear of exposure. Every successful fraud brought temporary excitement, but it also increased his paranoia. He became more cautious about strangers, police officers, and even casual conversations. He knew one mistake could destroy everything. Years later, Frank admitted that innocent people suffered because of his crimes. Bank employees were investigated after fraudulent checks passed through their hands. Some workers faced suspicion from their employers, even though they had simply been deceived. Frank eventually recognized that his scams caused emotional and financial damage far beyond the money he personally stole. Still, despite the growing risks, Frank believed he could continue fooling the system, and that dangerous confidence soon pushed him toward even more unbelievable identities, pretending to be a doctor. By the time Frank Abagnale was heavily involved in check fraud and impersonation scams, he had become used to constantly running from pressure. Investigators were getting closer, banks were becoming more alert, and maintaining his fake pilot identity was becoming harder. Instead of slowing down, Frank did what he always did. When trouble appeared, he created an entirely new identity and disappeared into a different world. This time, he decided to pretend to be a doctor. Frank managed to pose as a supervising physician at a hospital in Georgia. He introduced himself using a fake name and convinced hospital staff that he had medical training and experience. Surprisingly, nobody questioned him closely at first. His calm personality, professional appearance, and confident speaking style helped him blend in almost immediately. Even though he had no medical degree and no real training, Frank worked hard to avoid suspicion. He spent hours memorizing medical terms, hospital procedures, and common phrases doctors use during conversations. He listened carefully to real physicians and repeated their language in a believable way. Whenever medical staff discussed patients or treatments, Frank tried to stay quiet unless he absolutely needed to speak. One reason he managed to survive in the role was because he positioned himself as a supervising physician instead of a hands-on doctor. This allowed him to avoid directly treating most patients. He often delegated responsibilities to younger doctors or interns. Still, being inside a hospital created terrifying situations that were far more dangerous than cashing fake checks. At any moment, a real emergency could happen around him. Frank later admitted that this period frightened him more than many of his other scams. In a hospital, mistakes could cost lives. Unlike banks or hotels, the consequences here were deeply serious. He understood that if someone depended on him during a medical emergency, he could easily make the wrong decision. One incident especially shook him. According to Frank, a baby suffered from a serious oxygen-related emergency while he was at the hospital. Medical staff looked toward him for guidance because they believed he was the supervising doctor. Frank froze internally because he had no idea what to do. Fortunately, another physician stepped in and handled the situation properly. But the moment left a lasting impact on him. For perhaps the first time during his criminal career, Frank truly understood the possible human cost of his deception. Up until then, most of his scams had involved money, fake documents, and manipulation. Pretending to be a doctor was different. Real people's lives were involved. Years later, Frank openly admitted that this impersonation crossed a moral line even for him. He described it as one of the most reckless and irresponsible things he had ever done. He realized that his confidence and charm could not protect him from the consequences if someone died because of his lies. The fear of accidentally causing harm began weighing heavily on him. Instead of feeling excitement from fooling people, he started feeling panic whenever medical situations became serious. He understood that eventually his lack of knowledge would expose him. Before the deception turned into a complete disaster, Frank quietly left the hospital and abandoned the fake doctor identity entirely. But even after escaping, the experience stayed with him because it forced him to confront just how dangerous his scams had become. And despite finally recognizing limits he should not cross, Frank still wasn't ready to stop living under false identities. The lawyer scam. After leaving the hospital impersonation behind, Frank Abagnale did not slow down. Instead, he moved to another state and created yet another identity, this time stepping into one of the most trusted professions in society, law. He understood that lawyers were respected, feared in legal settings, and rarely questioned once they were inside official offices. That made it an ideal target for his next deception. Frank forged legal credentials, including fake degrees, certificates, and identification documents. He carefully studied how law schools operated and how bar admissions worked. His goal was not just to look believable, but to fully embed himself in the legal system. He knew that small mistakes in paperwork could expose him, so he made sure every detail looked official enough to pass basic checks at the time. One of the most surprising parts of his story is that he managed to pass the Louisiana bar exam without having any law degree or formal training. While this achievement is often discussed, it is important to understand that passing the exam alone did not automatically make him a qualified lawyer in the full professional sense. Still, it gave him enough credibility to be taken seriously. That credibility opened doors he never should have been able to walk through. Soon after, Frank began working inside the office of the Louisiana Attorney General. This was a position where real legal professionals handled serious government cases. For someone with no legal background, it was an extremely risky place to hide. But Frank relied on observation and imitation. He listened carefully in meetings, copied legal language, and learned how lawyers spoke and behaved in professional settings. His intelligence and natural charm helped him survive in this environment. He was quick to adapt, polite under pressure, and confident when speaking. Most people assumed he belonged there because he acted like he did. In professional spaces like law offices, people often trusted appearances, and Frank used that to his advantage every day. However, the pressure never went away. Every conversation with a real lawyer carried the risk of exposure. Any detailed legal question could reveal his lack of training. He had to stay alert constantly, remembering names, procedures, and legal terms without fully understanding their deeper meaning. It was mentally exhausting to maintain that level of control all the time. There was also something strange and almost unbelievable about the situation. Experienced lawyers, people who had studied for years and passed difficult exams, were treating him as one of their own. Frank later admitted that this felt surreal. He knew he did not belong there, yet everyone around him acted as if he did. This scam also showed him something important. He could infiltrate almost any system if he studied it closely enough. Schools, hospitals, banks, airlines, and now legal offices all had weaknesses. If he understood the structure, he could find a way in. But success came with a cost. Maintaining multiple fake identities over time created constant mental pressure. He had to remember different names, stories, and behaviors depending on where he was and who he was talking to. The emotional exhaustion slowly built up, even as his confidence on the outside remained strong. And as Frank continued living this double life, he was starting to realize that every new identity made it harder to ever return to a normal one. The women. As Frank Abagnale kept moving between identities, pilot, doctor, and lawyer, his personal life became just as fake as his professional one. One of the most complicated parts of his story is how many relationships he built during this time and how deeply those relationships were based on lies. Frank was very skilled at using charm and confidence to gain trust quickly. He knew how to speak politely, dress well, and act like someone successful and stable. Because of his fake identities, he was often seen as a pilot or doctor, which automatically made people respect him. That respect opened doors socially, as well as professionally. People wanted to be around him, talk to him, and include him in their lives. Many of the relationships he formed were built completely on deception. Women who met him believed they were dating someone with an impressive career. Some thought he was a Pan Am pilot traveling the world. Others believed he was a serious medical professional. In reality, none of these identities were real. But because Frank stayed consistent with his stories and acted confidently, most people never questioned him. He also formed friendships with coworkers, acquaintances, and strangers he met while moving between jobs and cities. These people often trusted him deeply. In some cases, they defended him when others showed doubt. They would speak positively about him, believing he was honest and reliable. Ironically, the people who trusted him most were the ones who knew him least. When Frank disappeared, often suddenly and without explanation, he left behind confusion and emotional damage. People who believed they had real relationships with him were forced to deal with the truth that much of what they experienced was not real. Some felt embarrassed, others felt hurt or betrayed. The emotional impact was far greater than Frank initially realized. Later in life, Frank admitted that he regretted how he treated people who genuinely cared about him. At the time, he was focused on survival, excitement, and staying ahead of the law. But looking back, he understood that he had used real emotions from other people to support a fake life. That realization stayed with him. Despite constantly being surrounded by people, Frank often lived with a strong sense of loneliness. Every interaction required him to stay in character. He could not fully relax or be honest with anyone. Even when people showed affection or trust, he knew it was directed toward a fake version of himself. That made it difficult for him to feel truly connected. Over time, this created a deeper problem. Frank began to fear real emotional connections. If someone got too close, there was always the risk of being discovered. At the same time, he also knew that any real relationship would require honesty, something he could not give while living multiple lives. This contradiction made his world feel smaller, not bigger. Even though he met many people and lived exciting experiences, deception slowly became more isolating than thrilling. The more he lied, the harder it became to imagine living without lies. And as pressure from his criminal life continued to grow, Frank was beginning to realize that every connection he made was built on something that could collapse at any moment. The worst thing he ever did. Over the years, Frank Abagnale has been asked many times about the worst thing he did during his criminal life. While most people expect him to point to the money he stole or the identities he faked, his answer has often been more personal and emotional than financial. For him, the darkest part was not the theft itself, but the way he used trust and emotion against people who believed in him. Frank has explained that emotional manipulation stayed with him in a deeper way than stealing money ever did. Money, in his view at the time, felt distant and abstract, but trust was personal. When someone believed in him as a pilot, doctor, or lawyer, they were not just accepting a story, they were placing confidence in a person they thought was real. Breaking that trust left a stronger mark on him later in life. He has admitted that betraying trust was worse than stealing money. In many of his scams, he did not directly attack individuals in a physical sense, but the emotional impact was still serious. People who worked with him, helped him, or defended him often had no idea they were being deceived. When the truth came out, some of them faced embarrassment, professional damage, or suspicion from others. In some cases, innocent people were investigated or questioned because of his actions. Bank employees, co-workers, and even professionals who simply interacted with him were sometimes pulled into investigations. Even when they were not responsible, they had to explain situations they did not fully understand. Frank later acknowledged that this kind of pressure on innocent people was one of the most unfair consequences of his behavior. There were also cases where reputations were damaged. People who trusted him or vouched for him sometimes felt embarrassed or misled when his true identity was revealed. Some relationships never recovered from that sense of betrayal. Frank has said that realizing this impact came much later when he was no longer living the criminal lifestyle. He also reflected on how his actions created fear and suspicion in everyday environments. After his scams were discovered, institutions became more careful. People became less trusting of strangers in professional settings. Frank recognized that he had contributed to a wider atmosphere of doubt, where honesty itself was questioned more often. One of the hardest parts for him to accept was that the emotional harm lasted long after he disappeared from a place. Even when he moved on to a new identity and a new city, the effects of his previous actions stayed behind. Unlike money, which could sometimes be recovered, emotional damage could linger for years. Frank has said that con men often destroy lives in ways victims do not always fully explain. The harm is not only about financial loss, but also about broken trust, damaged confidence, and lingering embarrassment. These effects are harder to measure, but often more lasting. Looking back, Frank believes that the emotional consequences of his crimes stayed with him longer than his time in prison or his years on the run. While he physically escaped authorities many times, he eventually realized he could not escape the impact he had on other people. And even as he continued his life after capture, the weight of those choices remained part of his story. The international hunt. As the scale of his scams grew, Frank Abagnale eventually became one of the most wanted fraudsters in the world. His ability to change identities, move quickly, and manipulate systems had worked for years, but it also made him a priority target for law enforcement agencies. Among those leading the search was FBI agent Joseph Shea, who became deeply focused on tracking him across multiple countries. Shea and his team studied Frank's patterns carefully. They followed financial records, travel behavior, and reported sightings. But Frank was extremely difficult to pin down. He constantly changed locations, switched identities, and used his charm to avoid suspicion. Even when authorities came close, he often managed to slip away using quick thinking and deception. He understood how to talk his way out of tense situations and how to disappear before systems caught up with him. At one point, Frank was arrested in different countries while traveling abroad. These arrests showed him how serious the situation had become. In some foreign prisons, conditions were harsh and uncomfortable. He was held in places where basic living standards were difficult, and the uncertainty of his legal future created constant stress. Unlike his earlier life of freedom and movement, he was now dealing with confinement and isolation. During this period, Frank experienced a mental shift. The constant running that had defined his life for years could no longer continue at the same pace. He later described how, once the pressure of escaping began to slow, he started feeling a kind of psychological collapse. Without the excitement of movement and deception, he was left with fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty about what came next. Before being extradited, Frank spent time in prisons in countries like France and Sweden. These experiences were very different from his earlier life of hotels and luxury travel. He had to adjust to strict environments, limited freedom, and the reality that his situation was no longer under his control. He also made a few escape attempts during this time, but none of them succeeded. Each failure added to his sense of desperation. Eventually, Frank was extradited back to the United States in handcuffs. This moment marked a turning point in his life. After years of moving through identities and countries, he was finally being brought back to face the legal consequences of his actions in his home country. The emotional impact of this moment was significant. Frank later described it as the point where he fully understood that his fantasy life was over. There were no more disguises, no more escapes, and no more new identities to create. For the first time in years, he had no role to play and no system to manipulate his way out of. Being returned to the United States meant facing reality in a way he had avoided for a long time. The world he had built through deception had finally collapsed, leaving him with only the consequences of his choices. And as he entered the next stage of his life, Frank would have to confront something he had never truly dealt with before. What happens when the lies stop working completely? An FBI consultant. After years of running from the law, Frank Abagnale ended up in a very unusual position. Instead of being treated only as a criminal, federal authorities became interested in something else he had: deep practical knowledge of how fraud actually works from the inside. Because he had spent years breaking systems, he understood exactly where those systems were weak. Over time, the FBI began using his experience to help with financial crime investigations. Frank started assisting agents by explaining how check fraud, identity theft, and document forgery were carried out in real situations. He described methods he had used, not to glorify them, but to show how criminals think. This helped investigators understand patterns they might otherwise miss. One of the key areas he focused on was check fraud, especially the kinds he once committed himself. He helped turn those old criminal techniques into modern security strategies. By explaining how he had exploited banking systems in the past, he contributed to improving detection methods and strengthening verification processes. His knowledge became a tool used to prevent the same kind of crimes from happening again. However, not everyone accepted his new role easily. There was a lot of skepticism about his story and whether someone with his past could truly change. Some people questioned if his involvement with law enforcement was appropriate at all. Others felt uncomfortable trusting advice from someone who had once caused so much harm through deception. Despite that, Frank gradually built a public image as a fraud prevention expert and speaker. He began giving talks to businesses, banks, and government agencies about security and trust. In these settings, he often explained how simple human mistakes like trusting appearances or skipping verification steps could open the door to fraud. His message was focused on prevention and awareness. Still, there has always been controversy surrounding parts of his life story. Some critics argue that certain details of his criminal past have been exaggerated over time. Others believe that his transformation is sometimes presented in a way that minimizes the damage caused by his earlier actions. These debates continue, especially in media and public discussions about crime and redemption. This leads to a larger question: should society fully forgive someone who once built a life on deception, even if they later use that knowledge to help prevent crime? There is no simple answer. Some see his work as valuable because it helps protect people. Others believe trust is harder to rebuild once it has been broken on such a large scale. Frank himself has often warned about modern scams and identity theft. He explains that even though technology has changed, the basic methods of fraud have not. In his view, greed, trust, and human weakness are still the main factors that allow scams to succeed. Criminals today may use digital tools, but they still rely on the same psychological tricks he once used in a different era. He also emphasizes that people often underestimate how easily they can be misled. Whether it is through emails, phone calls, or fake identities online, fraud continues to evolve. His goal in speaking publicly is to make people more aware of these risks so they can protect themselves. In the end, Frank's journey from master con man to FBI consultant remains complicated, shaped by both his past actions and his later efforts to prevent others from repeating them. And even today, his story continues to raise one final question about trust, change, and whether a life built on lies can ever be fully rewritten. If you found this story interesting, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories that go deeper into the hidden sides of famous figures.